I can give you a crystal clear example of how one of the fundamental stories in the Bible never happens. It's fake. It's a story. Okay.
Go for it.
The flood of Noah's Ark never happened. And I have all the evidence in the world to prove my case. Here we go.
Evidence in the world.
All the evidence in the world. Here we go.
I thought you come with something better than that.
So before I dive into it, let's recognize that the Bible, I should say Genesis in particular. Let's talk about Genesis, the origin story of life and everything that we know, right? God said, well, there was nothing, and then God said, let there be light, and he created the heavens and the earth and the stars and the food and the plants, and then man. And then he couldn't find a mate, so he tore a rib out of Adam and made Eve. And they put him in the garden, and they had everything to their disposal, but God said, don't eat from this one tree or else you will die. And then there's this whole debate of whether they meant figuratively or spiritually. Doesn't make any sense to me. And then you have all of their children, right? A bunch of inbreeding led to the rest of human creation.
Because you don't have the Holy Spirit. It will never make sense to you.
No, it's all right. Let him carry on. Carry on, Skeptic. Go for it, bro.
So this is the wacky story that leads to God realizing that he made a mistake and had to hit the reset button. He said, Noah and his family, you're okay.
Don't make mistakes.
Yeah, you're a bunch of drunks, but I like you more than the rest. Because if I created man in my own image and the rest of humanity's so bad that I got to hit the reset button on the whole planet, well, now we run into the Noah's flood story. And here it goes. In the book of Genesis, it clearly says that God wiped out all of the life breathers, all of the breathers that breathe, and all of the flyers that fly from the face of his creation, earth. All life was snuffed out, except for Noah's family on the ark. That is the language in the book of Genesis.
And the animals that went to their kind.
Yep.
Again, kind is not a thing. Right.
No. It is a thing. Yeah. That's the you need to listen. You just appeal to the language. Do it correctly then. If you're going to talk about who was taken onto the ark, do it correctly.
That's right.
It wasn't just Noah's family that was left on the ark.
And the animals according to their kind. That's right.
Exactly.
According to their kind.
You're going to make your argument.
According to their phylogeny. Just saying it. Carry on.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So you guys take this story literally.
It doesn't. That's not the argument. Make your argument. Sorry.
No, I'm
jumping from one thing to the other.
Do you take this story literally or figuratively?
I take it literally because it literally happened.
Literally.
Okay. I can demonstrate why that's a very silly claim. Here we go.
Okay, go for it.
Quick follow-up question. How long ago did this flood happen? According to the Bible, approximately how long ago was the flood?
Wasn't it like 6 or 7
around,
years, like that?
Yeah, something like that. I was going to say about between 5 and 6. Yep.
So my understanding was 4.5 to 5,000 years ago. We can go to 6,000. It doesn't matter. 10,000 years ago. We should all be able to conclude that the general shape of the world, the height of the mountains, the depths of the sea, that hasn't changed much in the last 10,000 years. Do we all agree?
No, because we know that mountains can come up in seconds with a volcanic eruption, right? We know that plumes. We know that plumes deep beneath the crust can push up mountains literally in a day. Yeah. So
tectonic plates. A whole bunch of
sorry, Issa, I'm going to get to the tectonic plates in a second, right? Carry on, Skeptic. Go for it.
Yeah, thank you. So you're right. You're right that volcanoes can create mountains or calderas in mere moments, and that is remarkable. I've seen volcanoes erupting a couple times. It's pretty cool. It's also terrifying. But I hope that we can agree that the Himalayan mountain range...
You're diverting the subject. You still haven't proved what you claim.
He's coming to it.
He's doing it, brother. He's doing it. Just give the
promise.
Yep.
Give him a minute.
Many times. So
Go for it, skeptic.
the tallest mountain range in the world today, the Himalayan mountain range, was the tallest mountain range within the last 10,000 years. This is an important point because we need some baselines to work from. If the entire world was flooded, then we have to conclude by that language that the Himalayan mountains were flooded. So we know the volume of water that it would take to flood the entire world. Now, whether or not the waters bubbled up from aquifers below the surface or rain from the heavens or the really silly story of the firmament opening and the water anyway, we know the size of the earth. We know the amount of water on the earth. We also know how much additional water it would take to flood the entire globe up to the top of the Himalayan mountain range. Now, all of the oceans, all of the seas, all of the Great Lakes and the big rivers add up to about 1.7 trillion cubic kilometers of water. This is a volume of water, 1.7 trillion cubic kilometers. To flood the entire globe would take an additional 4.5 billion. I'm sorry, did I say trillion? We have 1.7 billion cubic kilometers of water on the earth, in the oceans, the lakes, and the seas, and the rivers. It would take an additional 4.5 billion cubic kilometers to cover the entire globe with water. That 4.5 billion cubic kilometers of water does not exist. It doesn't exist. Furthermore, even if it did, even if it moved, if you had that amount of water move within 40 days and 40 nights, according to the story, if it rains and the bubbles and the waters bubbled up for 40 days and 40 nights, then we can actually calculate the amount of heat generated by the movement of that water. That volume of water, that 4.5 billion cubic kilometers of water moving at the rate within 40 days and 40 nights would generate enough heat to melt the surface of the earth. This is basic thermodynamics. This is a course I've taken, and people have done the math. That amount of water to flood the earth would melt the surface of the earth. There would be no Noah's Ark. There would be no two kinds of all they would have been vaporized. Now, that's just one data point. Let's talk about the trees. Look at the trees. It's called Dendrochronology. This is the study of the history of trees. We have trees about 4,000 years old, and we have dead trees that were 3,000 to 4,000 years old, and then they died, and we can map the tree rings according to the living trees to the dead trees. We can see growth patterns. Some years were good, some years were bad. Sometimes decades were good or bad for growth, and we can map the tree ring data very accurately, going back 13.9 thousand years of unbroken tree ring data. Now, if you accept broken chains in the tree, now we can also cross-reference this to ice core samples that go back hundreds of thousands of years, and then cross-reference those with dendrochronology, and we actually have dendrochronology in a broken chain going back something like 35 or 40,000 years. Okay, we have evidence.
Is that tied in with the flood, the dendrochronology?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So we should see a break in dendrochronology. We should see a marked difference in the year before and after the flood. The year after the flood, we should see all of the trees dead, because if the entire world was flooded, no tree can survive that amount of time in brackish water. Brackish meaning the mixture of salts, saline water and fresh water. There are very few species of fish that can survive that. Salmon is one of the very few that spawn in freshwater lakes and migrate into the oceans and live the rest of their life in the oceans until they go back into the freshwater to spawn again. Every other species, except for these very few species, would not survive this global flood. To have all of this salt water and fresh water mixing together, it is absurd to me when people claim that this is a factual thing that happened. We have no evidence of it. In fact, the evidence that we do have demonstrates that this claim fundamentally, factually, definitely never occurred. Certainly not in the last 10,000 years.
I'd like to read a verse. May I? Okay,
you can. Okay. Well, it's not my show, but it's fine by me.
It says, I wasn't asking you. Okay, John 3. Okay. 12. If I have told you earthly things, and you believe not, how shall you believe if I tell you heavenly things? That's the problem here.
But in the Lord of the Rings, it says when the elves die, their soul goes to a place called Valinor,
So
and they can choose to be reborn in Middle Earth.
I don't know. I'm not saying anything about Lord of the Rings.
The reason I'm bringing it up is to demonstrate how a claim in a book does not make
something that is not has anything to do the Lord of Rings. Really? That's what you got?
Okay. In Spider-Man, Peter Parker's uncle was named what was his name?
You're bringing up Spider-Man. You're bringing up man-made movies to compare to a verse that I just read.
It's Uncle Ben, by the way.
Uncle Ben, yes. Does Uncle Ben and Peter Parker exist? Right. Just the point.
Go on, it's bro.
The point, yeah.
If you're gonna
what a nerd I am.
Mock right.
You can't even get Lord of the Rings right, skeptic, let alone get the
I got Lord of the Rings. The reason I bring these fictitious stories up is to demonstrate how claims in a book does not make the claim true. So it doesn't matter to me what John says in the Bible. It doesn't matter because we need external sources of evidence to demonstrate whether or not that claim is true or false. And when the holy book, any holy book, like the Quran,
don't say you. Don't say we.
Skeptic, can I ask you a question? So you've drawn a couple sources of information, some data points here, from Dendrochronology to the amount of water you assume would have been needed, or you assume
it's known as the heat problem. If you look up the heat problem,
I've heard guys like Amun-Ra talk about stuff like this.
And
Dendrochronology, it's not a to be honest, it's not something new and exciting as you might think it is. It's these modern day atheists, they tend to run the same arguments. But I want to just the Dendrochronology argument is just run me through that again. So because I missed some of what you said. So you're saying that because we do not see trees, or if there's a global flood, then that part that I missed there, you're saying something about the rings, and what was that thing about you? If you can just repeat that for me, sorry.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Happy to do it. So dendrochronology is the study of the history.
I know what it is. I know what it is. What's your arguments?
Right. We all count tree rings, and we have an unbroken chain of tree ring data going back 13.9 thousand years. So
so you assume though. Wait, just hold on a sec there. That's the part I missed. So you assume it's one ring per year, correct?
Yes, the average tree. I mean, there are some species.
What is that assumption based on?
Observable evidence.
Okay. Now, is there factors that could create more rings in 1 year?
Perhaps, but very unlikely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so perhaps is enough for me, and I think you can probably look at it closely yourself. There are factors that could cause that. So then. Yeah. You rely on an assumption that it's one ring per year, and if you trace it back, we have 13,000 years. It's the same. In fact, it's the same assumption that you're using in the ice core rings. That it's one layer per year. And there's actually evidence, and you can go online and find this stuff. I've read it in the past. Ice ring layers can build up very rapidly, very, very, very rapidly in the space of a very short period of time. You're applying an assumption that it's one layer per year or one ring per year. We challenge that assumption. I don't think you've got a basis to make that assumption. You admit right now that
nature is just not that exact. Nature is just not that exact to do it. Yeah.
So here's why
there's got to be an assumption built in there that it's one ring per year, one layer per year, and then count it that way. You want to do it that and rest on those laurels? That's up to you, mate. Can't change your mind there.
Here's where we have to conclude that it's reasonable to recognize that trees have, on average, one growth ring per year, and ice sedimentation on average shows the same qualities, the same effect. Here's what I mean by a year. When the Earth rotates around the sun, one full rotation, the tilt of the Earth causes the northern hemisphere to have, winter and summer, and we see the vegetation growing in the spring and summer, and then it dies off every year in the fall and winter, and we see the atmosphere has a marked difference in CO2 levels according to what time of year it is. Because when it's the fall, when it's the early winter, when all of our vegetation is decaying and dying, we have this spike in CO2. This carbon dioxide is shot up. Methane, we have other markers like methane that also go up because of the natural decay of organic material. And we see this. We can measure it in the tree rings. We can measure it in the ice core samples. So when I say that ice core samples are an accurate indicator of years, it's not because, look, if there were on average more than one, what we could observe as a year within a year, that means the whole science is flawed. But that's not what we observe. Sometimes there are phenomena that cause a tree to stop growing and then start growing again. It could be a local environmental issue. Yeah. But when we look at the whole science globally, when we can cross-reference trees in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, completely they're not sharing a localized environment except for they exist on planet Earth. We have a very clear record of yearly growth patterns. I mean, this is an assumption that we have to make, but it's easy to make because we can observe it as being true. We know that trees don't grow in the winter. So there's a stop. In the northern hemisphere, when the tree, like this pine tree outside of my house, in January, it's not growing. It's surviving, right? It's still alive, but it's dormant, not growing. And then spring and summer hits and it's growing again. And that's when it develops a new growth ring. And the tree actually captures inside of its fibrous material certain qualities of the atmosphere. We can tell whether it was a high concentration of CO2 year or a low concentration or a high concentration of toxins and other bad chemicals because the tree captures these things in it. This is stuff we observe.
I want you to tie that into now. Just tie it into a 40-day flood.
Yeah.
But tie it in there. All
right. So if the globe, if it rained, if the waters flooded the rain for 40 days and 40 nights, and then there was a long period of them waiting and then sending out the birds, and then dry land appeared, right? This was approximately 100 days, 150 days. I can't remember what the Bible says, but this is certainly long enough for any trees submerged under this brackish water to perish. They could not survive that. So then Noah lands the ark on land and he lets go all of the animals. What did they eat? I wonder. There were no trees. There were no plants. There were no lemon trees or olive trees or grass because it was all destroyed from the flood. What did they eat?
Okay. Cool. Well, thank you, Skeptic. But man, I just want to address a few points that you mentioned there, and pretty much, I think some of the things you said shows maybe your idea of the of Noah's flood might not be the way you're imagining it to be. I think the way you're imagining it to be is that water just somehow swelled up uniformly across the earth and flooded the entire earth. No, it didn't, right? The scripture says that in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, on the day all the fountains of the great deep were broken up. So it wasn't just the rain, right? It was he utilized the waters in the oceans, and he says that the fountains of the deep were broken up. I interpret that as that's when the tectonic plates first, you could say, became a thing on Earth. Now, science tells us that 250 million years ago, when when everything was Gondwana, that there were no plates. It was all just one uniform crust, and then somewhere down the line, the Earth's crust just cracked. Right? I'd say no, that God cracked it around 5,000 years ago. Right, and when he cracked the surface, the crust deep underneath the ocean, that created so much energy that much of the water spilled over on the earth, right, or onto land. Okay, so if you were to have a look at a small earthquake deep beneath the ocean today, can bury half of Thailand and Indonesia, like what we call the Boxing Day floods, right? In 2006, I believe it happened. If a small earthquake can bury half a country, right? Can you imagine if the entire Earth, the entirety of the Earth's crust cracked in one go, right?
Yeah.
Much of the water is going to spill over onto the Earth. You understand what I'm saying? And so we don't believe that the flood was uniform throughout the earth. No, there were going to be some parts that are very, very deep, kilometers and kilometers deep. And then there are other parts of the land which might be only, I don't know, knee height. I really don't know. But it wasn't uniform, just this one swelling of the water and the whole earth was 1 kilometer deep, for example, like uniformly throughout the earth. No, it doesn't work that way, right? So there was a bit of a sloshing around with the water spilling over in some places, other places it's raining, other places this is happening, other places that is happening, right? And that's what we say about